Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TSMU Q&A series. So excited to be back with you all for another week. I am your host, Emily Kroll. I am the marketing manager over at Lenovo Legion. And today we are joined by a wonderful and super special guest, Daeda. He is our R6 coach for TSM. Jake, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing great, thank you. So excited to have you here, and everyone is super excited to ask you questions. We've already got a ton of questions queued up, but we will be pulling questions from the TSMU Discord. So if you do have a question for Jake, head to discord.gg/TSMU and ask your question in the Q&A questions channel. So while some questions are rolling in, Daeda, why don't you let us know a little bit about yourself and what you do in your role as the coach for Rainbow Six?
I am Daeda, the strategic coach for TSMR6. I used to be the analyst for Space Station Gaming, former world champions. Do a lot of strategic development and analytics for Rainbow Six. I do application developments, tools development. So I'll build I have a website for being able to display stats for a team as well as like all the analytics. But I'll add in stuff like tools to help develop strats faster, to be able to display information faster, to do breakdowns a lot better. I do individual player development and um, just pretty much whatever coach can't do is the head coach. I try to do. We try and divvy things up together. Uh, yeah, pretty much it. I'm not necessarily stuck in Siege though, so I do look at other esports and try and enjoy them. I think my favorite esport is League of Legends, and that's just because it's a lot cleaner and a lot more professional. But I don't know.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure there will be some questions about that, and we're going to learn a whole lot about what you do day in and day out at TSM. So let's dive right on into the questions. The first one we have here is from Ricky, and he asks, when it comes to attacking a site, do you guys teach strategy? Do you have a direct plan that everyone needs to follow, or is it more free flow and reactionary based on the defender setup?
I think that's a good question because I think when it comes to attack versus defense, it's a lot easier to see defense as structured, and for attack to be a lot more free flowing and like there to be a lot more pieces. So it's understandable to like not necessarily know if strategy is involved when it comes to planning for an attack round. Um, but we always go in with some form of plan, though it is typically a mixture of structure and free flowing. When it comes to attacking a map, typically in Siege, there's certain areas of control that you want to try and get. And I think typically you'll have like a default way to do things. Like you'll want to enter in like through X, Y, and Z, like through certain doors, through certain windows to gain certain control. And that's why like a lot of attack rounds will look very like similar in the beginning. But we do practice strategy for like let's say we wanted to take like a certain room and we needed to clear a certain utility before we could take that room. We will practice and we will go through like the utility that we have to clear that room. Um, so it is a bit of both in that sense. It just comes down to the prioritization of what areas are important, and that's the decisions the players have to make. So it is like a little bit of a mix.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. We have got plenty more questions here, so I'm going to keep rolling. Madman has the next question, and he asks, for your strats and what you do you work with a team or do it solo and then they comment on it?
Um, so typically the strats are developed on the support staff side of things. We have had in the past, we've had sessions where we will work with the players to develop something based off like an idea that an individual player has. But most often it will come from coach and I, or just like one or the other, like feeding on, like even like we might do it together, we might do it independently. Oftentimes we'll start with an idea that one person has, and then the other will come in halfway through and give a little bit of feedback and work together on it. but it typically will come from us. And then when we go through dry runs, which is where we'll typically like practice a new strat, that's when the player feedback will come in, and then we'll take that into the scrim in the day and just kind of take feedback off that as well.
Awesome. And I'm sure each player is bringing their own unique skill set to the table in each scenario as well.
Yeah, so they all have like different aggressive levels, and how they want to play out a round is going to be different based off their personality and how they think that the game should be played.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you. We've got another question from Pegasus who asks, how does one go about implementing machine learning and deep analytics? Is it just a faster way to collect stats similar to R6 Analyst? There's more to this question, but I'm going to let you answer that part first.
So this is one that I can't necessarily get too deep into, just because it's like everything is a competitive edge that you can have as far as breaking down a process. But we do have data scraping, which is what R6 Analyst does. R6 Analyst is a client side scraping, so like you install the software, it'll take it from your specific point of view, uh, but it is typically like base level stats feedback, similar with CCG. Whereas we do deep learning that is it's fairly difficult to implement for like individual matches. We have done it before. Typically, it will be used in a broader sense for like going into an event or trying to do like meta analysis and breaking that down, or like when we do like SI prep, we will always break down like individual teams and look at their like overall like team play style based off of deep analysis. But individual maps become a little bit harder because as we've gone into best of ones with only 7 matches, it reduces the sample size for an individual team. Before though, we could do stuff like back when I was on SSG was whenever I was like first pioneering a lot of the tools that I use, and we had lost at Raleigh up against Team Secret in just like a very aggressive manner. And so I like basically like had a decent sample size because they played a bunch, and I was able to find like their like rush rating, like how often they were going to rush based off of like the prep phase, like the 6 pick timer. Like if they 6 picked immediately and like their opposing team had 6 picked immediately, it would show me if they were going to rush or not with like an 80 something percent success rate, which is interesting. But we're kind of past that time, at least for now.
Cool. I had no idea how much you could predict. So the second part of the question was, are you looking for something specific? I think you answered that a little bit. Are the stats similar to what Siege.gg or R6 Analyst produce?
So you do have those baseline stats, but with CGG is hand-picked data, and R6 Analyst is typically just like the like kills from the scoreboard, like that information. But we take a little bit more as far as being able to look at plant denials, being able to look at like weapons, being able to look at like we like track the kill feed, which allows us to see like the times of kills. Whereas a lot of those sites don't take care of that other than the opening kill, opening death, and like when the round ends. So we do get a little bit more in depth when it comes to comparing ourselves to CGG and R6 Analyst.
That's pretty awesome. Thank you. We have another question from Ricky up next. He asks, when it comes to communication, is there a dedicated person to give call outs once they're dead? So not all four people are screaming the same call out.
That's an understandable question. Typically, how we roll it is, and this is a little bit more recent, because we have had like typically like our communication isn't bad, but we will run into it. Like every team will run into eventually like a communication like floods. So how we work it is if someone's dead and they're on a camera, even if they're alive, if whoever's controlling the camera has communication when it comes to like giving a call out when they're dead. So like let's say you have 2 cams up, typically like you'll have like those 2 people that are dead able to communicate, and then if someone's talking about like the flow of the round that isn't like just like detailed information, then it'll typically be the IGL, or it'll be like whoever like we have like a pre-round IGL, mid-round, and execute. Those can be the same person or different people depending on the map or depending on the season. But typically we'll have Matt like giving it like an overall flow depending on how he sees the round breaking down if he's dead.
Awesome. It's like the little things that you don't always think
Yeah.
about first, right? Next question is coming in from Pegasus, and he asks, "What's your day-to-day schedule like, and what's the day-to-day schedule for the team?"
I think that depends mostly on the time of year. So like we have basically, I would say, 3 to 4 schedules, depending on if it's the main season, if it's like pre-tournament prep, or if we're like like in the middle of a tournament. Our main season, we scrim 6 times a day. I think we do now roughly 50% of those are double scrims. We used to do more, but finding scrims in North America have been quite hard, like consistently. So oftentimes our day schedule will typically be VOD review slash drills and dry runs into scrims into post scrim VOD review, and then like a double scrim would typically be the same, but a little bit reduced down on how much we dry run and how much we drill in the beginning. And then mine typically starts with data collection and then some development. I'll try and do some code cleanup and then get into like the team schedule where I'll do like a lot of analytics and a lot of breakdowns while they're doing scrims, and like we'll do like scrim feedback reports. I'll try and take part of.
Awesome. So do you feel like you have a fun day to day? Each and every day is like new challenges, or does it tend to get a little bit repetitive at times? Or is it a mixture of both?
Um, it can be a mixture of both. A lot of the pre-tournament can be very tiresome because I'll do a lot more of the like scouting for a tournament. So a lot of it gets very repetitive as you're watching like 10 hours of maps a day, and then you're going into practice for like 6 to 8 hours and not really enjoying it. So
Yes. Blue light glasses all around.
yeah.
Blue light glasses for everyone. Okay, I'm seeing in the chat, Pegasus is writing in the Twitch chat that the questions are from Ohio State team that he's written here. So I will credit the Ohio State R6 team for your questions, Pegasus. Our next question, however, is coming in from Calfee. When you have an execute in mind before the round starts, but a key player of the execute dies before the execute can go through, how does the team adapt?
So a lot of the executes, so we do something that not a lot of other teams do, which is called drills. And essentially that is Poj and I and one other player essentially practicing, like we'll defend and execute. So like they have to like clear a certain section of the map, or it'll be like more often than not it's an execute. And we'll try and go through different scenarios. We'll take certain players out and like feed them in based on like their importance. And that oftentimes will lead to like a lot of like questions whenever like we'll try and like we'll have them try and execute on us. And we'll notice like this isn't working out or this is working out, and like we'll kind of give feedback on like what we could do differently. So when it comes to the actual like practice for it, a lot of the time like it is something that we've like prepared for to some degree. So like typically you'll look at like an execute losing like the hard breacher before you can get the wall open, or like losing like a player that's supposed to wedge the side open and they don't end up doing it. When it comes to the actual players communicating, oftentimes just comes down to like it comes down to the individual round, what they see, like what they see, what they don't see will oftentimes like pivot around that. So like they'll clear a certain utility and then a person dies. Like now they know at least like what utility isn't there and what is there, like what that means, and kind of pivot off of that. Um, but it definitely comes down to the players in that regard. Like as far as making it work out, which oftentimes they end up doing, which is always good. But we've definitely seen a lot of shortcomings lately as far as like last stage losing those pivotal players and not being able to push off of it.
Hmm.
So this stage we're trying to prep a little bit more around that and build a little bit more towards better understanding of what to do in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems like a timely question. And
Yeah.
Ricky has clarified, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off?
No, no, no.
Okay. Ricky has clarified in the chat as well that his questions are coming from the DePaul University R6 team, so shout out to them as well. The next question is coming from them. For a new team trying to improve and play better, what would you say is the number one thing they need to improve or learn?
I would say the biggest thing for a team that's like just starting out or like just like not necessarily like they're not where they want to be is to be realistic with yourselves. It sounds like something that's like very like cliche, but oftentimes like you need to be able to look at like where your changes need to come from. And oftentimes what teams will do is they'll see like, oh, we had a lot of success in this, so we shouldn't change that. But oftentimes when it comes into like trying to grow as a team, you have to be able to look at like your successes almost as failures, and like build off of those, if that makes sense. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I guess the be realistic is a lot more to work off of, and stick together. I think that's probably like a much easier, like a much quicker thing to bring in is like a lot of tier two, tier three, tier four teams. They'll go through like a bad season, they'll have a bad tournament, and all of a sudden they're like, well, I don't want to play with this team because this happened in this event. And like, if you aren't able to work together, like that's the whole point of those tiers is like Pro League is about being a good team, but it's about being such a good team that individuals can perform. Whereas the like tier two, tier three are about becoming that good team, being able to be that good team player, and you can't ever do that if you're just moving to other teams. And I think that's something that a lot of Siege has struggles with is kind of trying to be like you're trying to be a superstar player. You have to market yourself as an individual, but the reason why teams like won't pick up a tier two player more often than not is not because of their individual performance, but because of their team performance.
Mm, I think you're giving some great life advice.
Yeah.
Just inherently here. And in the beginning, you mentioned about self-awareness and needing to look at your successes as failures. And I just want to kind of expand on that. Do you feel like there have been any instances in your career, maybe, where you've had to practice self-awareness or that it has benefited you to look at your successes, maybe not so much as failures, but to learn from your successes and improve upon those?
Yeah, I think every season, like that's kind of how you want to take things is yeah, you have to think of like not necessarily I guess like for the high successes, like let's say we get like first in a split or like us winning the major last year, is like as soon as you win something, people are now going to try and counter whatever that is. So whatever that success was then will become a failure next season if it's the only thing that you rely on. And I think that's something that like we always try and like build upon is like whatever we did well, like if we're like a standout team against other teams in like in a stage or a season, is like whatever that is will likely be our undoing if we like if it isn't like a core like attribute to work off of. Um, but individually, I would say I was doing really well in a team before I joined TSM, and I guess I the success was that I was good, but the failure was that like I wasn't doing what was best for myself. So like I worked with a team unpaid, like I didn't have like a paying contract for 11 months. And I think like it was a success in getting to that spot, being able to work with a professional team for that long, but the like that it was a failure because I worked that long without like taking care of myself. And I think that's like one of the shortcomings that a lot of people getting into the scene will do is like they won't take care of themselves as like well as they should. They should like treat themselves better than the company that they work for is treating them. And
Yeah.
I think like that was something that like it got me here. It got me to a better place. It got me to respect myself a lot more. So it was a success that I think overall was a failure.
Awesome. That's great advice. And the silver lining, like you said, is that you're here now. You made
Yeah.
it. And it's unfortunate. And I think you can, even just by what you just shared with us, you can help play a part in helping other people to realize when they might be in an unfortunate situation that they need to get themselves out of.
Yeah, most definitely. I think everybody can take from that.
For sure. For sure. Well, I want to remind you guys, since we're about 20 minutes in, that we are pulling questions from the TSMU Discord. So if you have questions for Daeda, head to discord.gg/TSMU and ask your question in the Q&A questions channel. Okay, on to some more questions for you. They are rolling in. Next one comes from Pegasus, Ohio State, I believe. If I got it wrong, you guys are going to flame me in the chat. So how does the team prep for a match? What does the team do to prep for majors or SI? I totally just butchered that.
I guess I'll go for generalizing to tournaments. Like I'll lump in the majors with SI. Oftentimes, we will prep every opponent at the event beforehand, and then from that, we have like a basic understanding of like the generalized meta for the event. Because even though like globally, like Latin America's region will have like a certain meta, EU will have a certain meta, NA will have a certain meta. You have to like filter that out into the specific teams that are going to an event. So we'll break down like every team, and then we'll kind of lump them together and try and like find that equalizer to find like how likely we are to play against like aggressive teams or just not like more strategic teams. Um, and then when it comes to practice, like realistically, like we practice the most out of any team in North America, even if we've had rough results recently. Um, like we'll practice like 6 out of 7 days. We'll practice for extended hours. We'll do like certain things like the drills that not many other teams are doing right now. Like I think the only team that does something close to it would be Dark Zero for NA as far as drills, but theirs are slightly different. Um, but realistically, like we prep and practice every match as it because you want to have that rhythm. You want to be able to like know what you're going into. You don't have to be like, all right, guys, now we're prepping for a tournament. It's going to be different. Like, it's not different. Like, you want to like practice every match. You want to. Everybody's playing to win, so you're prepping every match to the best of your ability.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you for your answer. Um, the next question we have here is from Ricky, aka DePaul University R6 team. They've asked, when you do VOD review, is there anything specific that you're looking for, or is it just an overall, this could have gone differently?
So VOD review will I guess all of my questions are always, well, it depends. Well, it depends on the kind of VOD review. 'Cause sometimes we'll do individual VOD review with individual players. Sometimes VOD review will be introspective versus like looking at an opponent. Sometimes it'll be for data collection. Oftentimes we'll look through like a singular VOD multiple times over. If it is for like an upcoming opponent, oftentimes we're breaking down like their play style, how they want to take like certain strats. So we'll look through different like takes on a site and just kind of look for those commonalities and try and see like how they want to think throughout the match. When it comes to our own, which is what it sounds like you're referring to for like scrims, is oftentimes like you don't want to nitpick on like everything that's gone wrong in a round. Like you like want to talk over it just to like reinforce like, hey, like yeah, we understand like this was a mistake, but like we can work through it. But oftentimes we talk through like repetitive mistakes that happen, or like we give alternative feedback on a round. So like if someone held something a certain way and like it might have lost us the round, but it might not have been the wrong decision, we can still talk through those alternatives and be like, well, you held this here and it was great. It gave us this intel and like we lost the gunfight, but like you could have done this. You could have worked with the teammate here. You could have called someone here, and it's possible that we would have shut them down a little bit harder than we did. So it really depends on the kind of bot review, but oftentimes it isn't like we're just like, oh well, like that happens, like mistakes happen because they do happen, but it's a lot more on those like discussions because those discussions typically lead to more thought than just being like, oh yeah, like you guys like screwed up here, like
Right.
it doesn't really give you much. Whereas if you talk about like, well, like you did this and this was correct, you give positive reinforcement on decision making that was made, but then you also provide alternates to work off of.
Right. Yeah, that's where the real value is, the solutions.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, he's spitting as people are saying in the chat. Everyone's really excited about today's Q&A. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Daeda, for being here. Everyone is really loving it, seemingly, from the chat. Our next question comes in from Lucky, who is the competitive coordinator of R6 at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm sure I pronounced all of that wrong. But they've asked, is there a solid way of creating synergy with a new team? We get new rosters every year due to the players leaving because of college classes.
As far as it's very hard to like you don't necessarily know if a team is going to work until it works or it doesn't work. Um, when it comes to the like tier one level, realistically, like you have to be open to making like you have to be able to making changes as a team and as an individual. I think the biggest thing for like I guess like a brand new team, like if you're forced to swap like players in and out, is be willing to put like people that are supports on flex roles, be willing to put them on entry roles, like give them like a chance to like find new things because as you work together, like you're able to like naturally kind of create like you let like the players essentially like see how they do in like a certain situation in like in a given role. The other thing would be doing like if you can try and implement drills. I know not many teams are able to do it, but I'm assuming like with a college that you're going to have a head coach, potentially like an analyst or a secondary coach, um, being able to take like two VXs and like try and like work those out. They're like a nice casual way to like have your players talk through solutions as you'll go through like the same execute like 30 times over. Um, and yeah, I don't know if that works or not. Oh, we're back. Um, we'll sit through like half an hour of just like a singular site, and just try and like talk through it all. And I think like that helps a lot as far as like having like everybody kind of communicate like how they want to flow through a map. But as far as like overall synergy, I I have no idea as far as like like being forced to create synergy. Oftentimes, like it's just something that happens over time.
So you guys don't sit around and do the icebreaker games that you have to do at the start of classes or the
No,
start of a new job.
no, I guess as far as like when we moved out here from like online to like in person, we used to have like the occasional movie night that doesn't happen as much. But like we'll spend time with each other outside of practice. But realistically, like it's hard because like we're one of the longer standing rosters now is like the core 6 out of 7 has been together for quite some time. Um, so it's as far as like making changes, like I've only sat through X amount of roster changes, X amount of like entire team changes. So I don't know if I necessarily have like the best solutions as far as like we don't like hold hands but around a campfire or anything like that. But
That's a shame. I'll have to call Andy and let him
yeah,
know.
yeah, I try to get everybody to go hiking in the mountains here. That's been a long no for like a year and a half. But
What? Okay, movie nights and mountain hikes are coming back. 2022 is your chance.
heck yeah.
You got it. All right, next question is from Chung, and he has asked, what are the best and worst parts of the R6 community from a coaching standpoint in the pro scene?
Think the best part about the community is the passion and the support. When someone gets a team, they like latch to that team, and I think for like any esport, like you end up with like toxic fan bases that are like super dedicated to a team, and like those happen in like every sport. Um, but like being able to see like there are a lot of like positive communities that grow from R6 esports that I really enjoy. I think the worst part is as a fan, you can only see like a team's success based off of wins and losses. Like you either win and you're the best team in the world, or you lose and you're just a trash team. Like you're absolutely in the dumpster. Like win every game in overtime, and like man, you suck as a team. But like example being like when I was with SSG, it was back when ties were a thing. and there was like a massive meme about like we tied like every single match that we possibly could. We'd beat like the bad teams, but then we'd tie every other team. And like we were seen as a bad team because we couldn't finish out the matches, which is understandable. But then we were also able to take every team to max rounds. And I think like a lot of the players like I saw like a lot of negativity like out of like individual players where it was just frustrating to them to see like we're doing like well, but we're just like we're not good in their eyes. And I think like that kind of sucks to a degree. But
Yeah,
I think overall like the passion of the fans is almost as strong as the passion of the players, and I really love that.
that's awesome. Have you had the opportunity to be, I'm sure you have, be at an in-person tournament?
Yeah, I've been at a few, not as many as I'd like to, but hopefully we'll get those more and more again. Because like, I think the weirdest thing is like I've never had to sign anything because before like I was just an analyst or like nobody knew that I was working with like I worked at TSM for SI 2020 and nobody knew that I was, so I got to like just like meet like a few dedicated people that did know. But like at Raleigh, like I had like people asking for my signature and I was like, what is this? Like, how do you even know who I am?
What?
And it
That's
was
so
really nice, but it's definitely interesting.
wow. Okay. Well, I'm in Raleigh right now with all of your biggest fans. So next time you take a
Oh,
trip out here, we'll just get more
yeah.
autographs on your radar there.
I could pass on
Awesome.
that.
Next question. I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No, no.
Okay. Our next question is coming in from Madman, who has said in the chat that they are representative of the Emergence R6 team. So they have asked, "Hey, Data, number one fan here. I'll give that to Madman. I was wondering what is the most efficient way to take down stats and to implement new ideas into games."
So the most efficient way for stat tracking that I found is data scraping through OCR. So like you'd kind of have to be like tech savvy or get someone that is to get like go through it. Um, you essentially will have like a system scanning the screen to look for like the key indicators of like the operator selection screen of like the kill feed and essentially track that information. And that'll be the most efficient way, but reasonably if you're going to make a system that isn't automated would just be to go through the VODs and like try and like keep track of only the information that you know that you're going to use as like a beginner. It's like when I first started out, I was collecting everything and I didn't start using a lot of that information until like a year later, and it took me like 9 months to set up an automated system. So I was tracking like several hours worth of VODs for no reason until it was actually usable.
Sometimes you just got to let it build up first, right?
Yeah. And then new ideas just comes down to strat development. Like you have like an interesting idea to work off of and you just like you build off of it. You're like, "Oh, like I've seen a team do this and I really want to counter that and like that might actually be something that counters a lot more than just that." And you just spend a couple hours working on it. I'll see if Poach is okay with me releasing. I did like a counter strat for a team that became like one of our main strats a season and a half ago. I'll talk with Poach and see if I can release that sometime on Twitter. I might do like a breakdown of it and try and like give it like a better idea of like where it came from and like how it grew.
Whoa. Industry secrets. You heard it
Yeah.
here first. Awesome. Well, we can't wait to see if you get the approval on that one. I'm sure everyone would love to see that. Our next question comes from Hale Razor Panther. And they've asked, what was the biggest challenge in developing your analytics approach?
Um, I think the biggest challenge in developing my analytics approach was it's hard because there's like two different challenges. So the first challenge is being that all of it was self-taught, and like learning like looks like it would be easy, but then like trying to like you have like an idea, like I had like an idea of like what could be done that wasn't being done. and a lot of that was the automated system, a lot of it was the machine learning. Um, and like it's fantastic to have that idea, but then you're just like, oh, it'll be easy. All I have to do is like spend a couple weeks reading, and that is not the case. Um, I'm still working on a system. Like this system is not at all close to being complete because it's very easy to like dive in and just like realize how deep everything goes. You have to learn how to do like coding for server side stuff. You have to do application development. You have to get into machine learning, which is a whole thing in its own. Um, and outside of that, I would say it is removing bias. Um,
Mm.
I think it's very easy to like, do you see like, man, like we just lost like 3 games in a row and I'm like, man, we must suck at this map. However, like oftentimes like that is a very biased approach because you have like a different way that you could be thinking about that map. You could be thinking about like why that map failed, and like you could just avoid the map, which is oftentimes where the bias like wants you to go. It's just like, well, like we should stop playing that map because we just suck at it, or like we did the same take X, Y, and Z like happened, and like we just suck at it and like just dismiss it. But realistically, like oftentimes like a strat can be good or a map can be good for you. It's just that you have to change like your mindset, and that bias kind of clouds it.
Mm. Another great life advice piece. You're giving us all of the real life truths today as applied through our six strategy. That's awesome. Thank you for your answer. Oh my gosh, we've gotten so many more questions, so I've lost my place. Pardon me. Okay. Pegasus, who again is from Ohio State, has asked, how do you motivate the team?
Um, Personally, I find a lot more motivation comes through Poj than me, and that's because like I'm a very like nervous person. I'm a very like quiet person as is. So like whenever like anxiety hits, like my voice is a little bit shakier. So like when we are at the Mexico major, like and like even stage two, like I didn't want to have to call a timeout because I know like just like the anxiety in calling a timeout is like a lot, and like that's oftentimes like why I prefer to stay in like the secondary role as like a strategic coach as an analyst that's not on stage. It's like, you have to be like realistic with yourself on like where your strengths and weaknesses are. And like when I first joined TSM, there was like the chance for me to trial as the head coach, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like I'll do it for as long as we have to, but like I want to find a replacement. Um, but as far as like motivation and like scrims and whatnot, it's just like it's more about, like, making people think differently, and I like, that's where I feel like I'm a little bit stronger is, like, I can make strats that make them think differently about a map, but as far as, like, if it's, like, calling a timeout for a mental reset, like, I have to, like, spend the entire like, it's a lot more stressful as a coach to, like, watch the game being played than it is for, like, to actually be, like, the player because you're watching 5 perspectives and you're watching things go right, you're watching things go wrong, and, like, I'm doing that, and then I'm also like stage 2 the entire time. I was like, please don't let me like have to call a timeout. I'm sitting there just like mentally preparing myself to call a timeout, which should be super simple and like it's something that probably gets better over time. But I definitely think like I do less of the motivation and I leave it more for Poach and more for like the IGL to do more motivation than anything. If anything, I'm just like I make a bunch of bad jokes and that changes their mindset, I guess.
That's awesome. I think our next question really feeds into this. It's also coming from Ohio State. How do you handle issues or conflict with the team?
Um, I think so as a team, we've only had like a few of those like daunting big conversations like a couple times in the past 2 years, like 2.5 years. Like we're fairly self-sustaining when it comes to like issues. We don't have like the big issues come up. Like we've had like after Mexico, like we had like a big discussion in like middle of last stage, we had a big discussion. And like those were just because like we were trying to make changes that we didn't have enough time to make those changes for, and like that creates a lot of stress. Um, and like those ended up being like they start out as like tense questions that you don't want to like ask or you don't want to hear like asked, but like they're questions that need to be asked, and oftentimes they come out in a healthy way. I think the team, like, naturally, like, we get an issue and we just like bring it up and we're like, yep, we're gonna work on this, and then it gets worked on and fixed. And, like the big issues are typically things that are like they're not necessarily like, oh yeah, like we'll just fix that because that's not necessarily how easy issues are. Um,
Yeah.
but like overall, like I think the team just naturally we have a core roster that like works really well together. Um, and like we just like cycle through it, I guess.
Helps when you don't have a lot of conflict on the team.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's for sure. Awesome. Lucky is back with another question, and they've asked, how did you get into the esports industry in regards to a deep learning analyst? Oh, how did you become a deep learning analyst? And can you tell us your story that would show your start in deep learning to where you are now?
Um, so as far as how I got here, initially I wasn't doing deep analytics. I did heat mapping for CS:GO, but that was probably the closest thing that I had before. Uh, but when I first got in, I had like zero connection, zero like everybody that isn't in the scene or like wants to be like higher up in the scene will always say that it's about connections for getting a job. But I nobody knew who I was, and I think like that had like a big impact on like how I grew. Um, but as far as deep learning, I didn't start that until a couple months after joining, and a lot of that just was it came from an idea of just like I see how like other teams are doing it. Like I saw like a few videos about how like some European like coaches were doing things, and I saw like a few things where it's like, well, they're doing sort of like the baseline of where I'm at now. But I definitely think like if other teams are doing that, like how much further can you go beyond that? Um, and I guess I can't give like too much information on like our system. I can't give too much information on like how I do things. What I can say is if you have an idea, even if you don't think like you can get anywhere with it now, like you work on that idea until you can like present it to someone, and you have to give them like the reasons why something is viable and why you are needed. It's like I've been shut down by teams. Like when I left SSG, like I shut off my assistant to like a few other teams, and like the teams wanted it. The teams like this is fantastic, but even beyond that, it's like I had to prove not just to them, but to the organization that they worked for that I was worth it. So like a few orgs were like they already had like a subscription, like the pro subscription for CGG, and like now they have to choose between like spending only 1,000 a month or however much it is for CGG versus like paying my salary. Like
Mhm.
that definitely changed where I landed because like TSM like as much as I love the team that I work with, and like this is like by far like the best roster that I've gotten the chance to work with. They like weren't necessarily the first option because originally I was planning to leave North America, but like a lot of the orgs in other regions, like their allocation is definitely like not towards like deep analytics.
Mhm.
So I don't necessarily have like a good story other than like how you can market yourself for like deep learning.
Yeah. Yeah, well, marketing yourself is like just as big a task as having all of the skills and like having that ability to sell yourself.
Yeah,
It's definitely unique in your field for sure, but can apply to many other jobs and industries as well. And there's always going to be so many applicants. Just that alone
yeah,
can definitely be daunting for people. So learning how to sell and market yourself is an excellent skill to have. All right, our next question comes back in from Ohio State, and they've asked, what do you tell the team during timeouts? I have a feeling this is going to be another it depends question.
so there are two different ways that you can approach a timeout. It does depend. Um, depending on the team, sometimes you need to point something out that's like strategic in the sense of like, all right, guys, like what you're doing is fantastic, but like they're doing like these takes. You can give recommendations on like what strategies to try, what adjustments to make. But the one that comes out more often than not is more about the mental. Like
Mm.
a lot of it becomes more about like trying to help like emotionally stabilize people, mentally reset people, like try and get them in like the right mindset to win the next few rounds. I think a lot of players when like things get really tense, it's easy to just like burn out, and like you have to have like some sort of like typically like you play like a ranked game and you're stressed out, you just walk away. But like you don't have that in a match, and like the coach has to provide that reset for the players, and more often than not, that's where everything goes. Is like you'll want to like try and like amp a player up. You want to try and like get a player to calm down. Sometimes like a player's too overhyped, they're too overzealous. You need to like have them take a chill pill. Other times you need to like try and amp someone up. You got to like get someone to have like a posture check. It'll depend on like the individual players. It'll depend on the team. It'll depend on like everything, depending on like what's happening in the match. But those are the big two. It's just like you're either like giving strategic advice or you're just giving a mental reset.
Do you have any preferred strategies for that mental reset or a
Um,
funny or great example?
for me, no. I think I've only taken like 3 timeouts, like, consistently, and often more often than not, like, I'll provide, like, one line of, like, "Alright, like, this is, like, how, like, we need to change the flow, and, like, this is what I see what's happening," but more often than not, like, I prefer to just let the and I think a lot of coaches prefer to let the players talk it out. Like, just having, like, being like, "Alright, like, here's an idea, but you guys talk about it." It allows the discussion to, like, kinda grow, and, like, oftentimes, like, getting the players engaged in that manner, like, just,
Mhm.
like, they're, like, looking for you to say something, and you just take a step back and, like, force them to have to communicate, like, they're there for it, like, they needed that time, and more often than not, you see a lot more success when they're able to just talk it out themselves than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, we've got some more questions for you here and about 15 minutes left, so I'll keep trucking through them. Next one comes in from, hold on, we got more questions. My gosh, I've lost my place again. Okay, next one is also from Ohio State. What do you look for when holding tryouts, and how important is a player's rank?
Um, so we haven't had to do tryouts in a long while. I think our last tryout was for Chala, and before we even we basically like we knew we needed to Ubisoft was making a coach change where you had to have 2 coaches to be in the pilot program, like to be in tier 1. So we knew we needed another coach on like we'd already known because I didn't want to be the head coach. But like we knew we needed one by a certain date, and we couldn't find any coaches that could do like what we needed, and we knew that Hoj could do like what we needed. So initially, like we were looking for head coaches and we couldn't find anybody that would fit our qualifications. So we were going to move Poach to head coach because we knew it was a lot easier to find supports than it was to find a coach. Um, and my main recommendation was Chala because he had I had already worked with him on SSG. I knew where his strengths were, I knew where his weaknesses were. And we actually watched we basically talked through our options, and like we had before we even, like, went through a list, it was like, "Alright, let's look through, let's, like, kinda watch, let's watch this last Challenge League game and, like, see, like" we weren't necessarily looking for him to pop off the way that he did in his last match, but it was like he was the only person on his team that was droning, he's the only person that was, and he wasn't on a support role either, like, he was playing the flex role, he was playing Sophia on Cafe, I think. So he's playing that flex role, and he's the only person that was droning, he was the only person you could see, like, working with other people, like, consistently just through the gameplay. Um and that would be the same stuff that we would look through for a tryout. Because, like, yeah, like, technically we were trying him out, like, for that period, but, like, realistically, that just became scrims. Um, we look for people to be team players, we look for people to be communicative, we look for people that are, like, they're willing to work with other people, and, like, you can tell that they're not gonna shut down over a long period of time. Oftentimes, there's what we call a honeymoon phase, which is typically when a team does really well when they have a new player because they have to work through the basics, and oftentimes it'll be how quickly you work through those basics. As far as rank, I don't think rank matters. As dumb as it sounds, like it is a baseline, but if you look at it last season, I didn't play ranked. Chala didn't play ranked. Matt didn't play ranked because of how bad like the state is. So like if anybody's trying to like use ranked as an like a justification for how like good or bad a player is, like it might be good for lower tier like teams because you don't have that much to go off of, but realistically, like once you get past a certain point, like you at least need like if a player's in plat 3 or plat 2, like they're good enough to be like tried out for just because at that point typically they're going to know the basics and you're able to see in those first couple of trouts if they're like worth it skill wise. So I think rank depends, but like after a certain point it doesn't matter because people are gonna stop playing ranked when there's like a big issue that Siege has right now.
Mm. Yeah, well, your response really feeds well into the next question, also from Ohio State, which is how seriously do you take tier two and tier three teams or players? How do the skills at each level differ?
I think so versus like tier 1 to tier 2, there's like a massive gap, and oftentimes that is like how much of a team player someone is, or like outright like the like mechanical skill and like the consistency behind it is what matters. But I don't think like we'll prep tier 2 and tier 3 just the same as tier 1. If anything, we have smaller sample size, or like when it comes to tier 3, um, we're more likely to go through like their like rank stats to like see what operators they play. Just because a lot of like lower tier players are more likely to play what they play in competitive and ranked, just because like they want that edge to get higher in ranked, and like it's understandable. But I don't think we take them any less. I we might take tier 3 less the same than like tier 1, but oftentimes we'll take tier 2 like just as serious as tier 1, uh, depending on like how like close our practice is. It's like if we've had a practice before where we have had practice before where we just flawless like every single map against a tier 2 team, and like we're less likely to practice against them, and that's not necessarily because they're tier 2, it's just because they're not a team that we're a good team to, like, counter them. But, like, we'll still,
Mm.
like we value tier 2 just as much as we value some tier 1 teams. Um, and when it comes to, like, players, like, if we had to pick up a player, like, we look through, like, every region, we look through every league, we're going to, like, prep ourselves for, like, every level, whether it's picking up a player or playing against a player. And then the skill levels typically is tier 3 is people that aren't necessarily like they either aren't old enough to perform in tier 2, and it depends on if it's like typically I used to say so tier 2 is typically deemed as nationals, tier 3 is or tier 2 is challenger, and the tier 3 is nationals, but in NA tier 3 is like the community leagues. Um, I think a lot of the community league players aren't necessarily good teammates, um, whereas tier 2, they're a little bit better. But when it comes to like nationals teams are a lot better than community at being teammates, which is why you see a lot of like EU Challenger League being a lot better than NA Challenger League. It's just that they stay together, they're able to like be teammates, and I think like that like reflects on those levels as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just giving us all of the knowledge here. We do have a few questions left. What are your thoughts on the current competitive scene? How would you change it?
Um, so I think the competitive scene is interesting because we've always wanted change, but we've never known how to change it. I think adding in the point system globally isn't bad. I think uh, they need to find a way to filter it out through region. And then I also think that we need playoffs after each stage to qualify for majors. So what a lot of I would say like the LCS and LEC, what they do is the top 4 teams in a region go into the upper bracket, and then you essentially have the bottom 2 feed into the bottom bracket. And I think that
Mhm.
we could do that for a lot of the regions. So like we had like let's say like the example for this major is like us, DZ, Sonics, or I guess SSG, OXG, Sonics, and DZ playing in the upper bracket. We can go through the losers bracket with Mirage for Sweden, and like that might be like seen as like, oh, like you're just upset that you didn't make it. But I do think like since the majors are best of threes, it'd be better to try and like give like a system that and like a tournament type system to kind of like give those teams that are at the end of the season to like get a chance on that. Because like a lot of teams, like if you look at like XET's first couple games, XET being like one of the bottom tier teams in the league that's potentially getting relegated. They had a few bad games, like really bad games the first like half of the split, but then they were actually not doing that bad towards the end. And I think like if they'd been given a chance like through a system like that, even though they wouldn't have qualified anyways, I think a lot of teams like do worse in the beginning of a season, especially like the teams that are like newer together, like if they've just made a roster change. And if you had like a system, it would kind of like feed through. And I think like doing that for majors would be really interesting because then it would give teams like it would give the viewers like a system that allows you to like see like how a team does. And like the example being Latin America, they do a similar system where they have the top six from Brazil go in, and they have from South America and Mexico, they have some teams go in. And one of the top teams from Brazil that was expected to go in is Team Liquid, and they got knocked out of the tournament early, and they weren't able to go to the major. And like, I think it was fairly reflective of like how they were as a team and their consistency. And I think like as much as it sucks, I think DC's a good team, but I think like they've got a lot more that they need to work on because they're like right now they're seen as like a team that's like more like bit of cheese things in the region. So they're gonna be really good, or at least they should be really good at best of ones. And like they're a team that's much better if they're able to practice against a team. So like they're able to do well in region, but when comes to out of region, they might suffer. And I think that like once like teams get into like playing against that cheese, they're less likely to like have a bad performance against them. So you might see like Mirage, you might see like every team that like lost to DZ, I think has a better chance at beating them just off of how they're playing now. And I think like this is the current system just allows like teams like that like necessarily aren't bad, but like won't do well internationally like by playing that way. At least from my like professional opinion, like that's not like successful in this meta like globally. I think like it'll filter out those teams a lot more, which I think would be interesting. As well as we get like 7 matches, like a stage to qualify for a major, whereas before we had back when it was ESL, it was 14 matches to qualify for a major, the Pro League finals, or um, cat attacking me. Um, or it was like the last season was we had round robin bet or GSL best of threes to like filter top four into top four, and then now we're into a system where you just play 7 maps. And like we literally had a stage where we played 2 teams and like we pretty much played the same amount of maps, which was ridiculous. I know that was kind of lengthy, but
No, it sounds like a lot. Do you have time for 2 more questions while your cat is attacking
yeah,
you?
yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, I will ask you the last 2 questions then. Um, how do you practice and scrim meaningfully? How do you know you're actually getting better when you're inconsistent?
Uh, I think even if you're having like bad performances in scrims, it doesn't necessarily make it a bad scrim. The only time a scrim is bad is whenever leave me alone. Uh, she is currently working on cable management right now, apparently. Um, I guess like a lot of people see, oh, like we didn't do well in a scrim, like we must be bad, or like it was a bad scrim, but like those are the best scrims. Like more often than not, like last stage we had like an entire week where we did like 11 O's every single scrim map, like when we made the change for Chala to be IGL, and like you think it bodes well for match day, and then like we get rolled on some of those match days. Whereas like we've seen a lot of like the scrims where like they are close lead to better match days because we know like we need to tighten up on certain areas. Um, so I guess like they become meaningful whenever you're not making big mistakes and whenever you're able to like when you're losing rounds off of those nitpicky mistakes because more often than not that's where you're losing, like you're more consistently going to lose those matches on match day than you are those big mistakes because you're more likely to focus on those big mistakes. Whereas like if you let those like smaller ones go under the radar, that's where you really get screwed up. Um, uh, and how do you know when you're actually getting better when you're inconsistent? Um, I guess the biggest thing is like you have to build consistency in some degree. So like you might have inconsistent performances, but then you have to build like a consistent schedule. You have to build a consistent play style. You have to build consistency when you're feeling inconsistent. So it's like you have to build a better foundation to build like a higher building. Like you have to like if your building's just toppling over, that means that you have a bad foundation. Whereas like you build that consistency up and like even if like individually like a player might not be performing well, like if they're able to like reduce all the values and variables down to like something that can be tracked, then you can track what is going wrong. And I think like that's something that everybody could do is like you build up like a good morning routine, like even beyond just practices. Like you can build up a good morning routine that will like allow you to like know how you're like starting your day. You could build up like a good practice routine and you build up like you know like your posture whenever you're going to play. Like if you're having like inconsistency in aim, you put your arm on the table in a certain spot. You don't put it there. You put your elbow like into your chest so that you have some sort of consistency to work off of. You like take pictures of like how you're holding your mouse and like you like every time you come to practice, you like put your hand in that position just so that like you can get used to it, and then eventually like you don't have to look at those pictures because your hand just feels it become more natural. And like you have to do that for every instance that you can if you want to get better. Like you don't have to, but like it will help, and like it's very good for like someone that's beginning. It's just like give yourself that foundation.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing all of these facts with us, all of this inside knowledge. I've got one last question for you before we end this stream. The last few questions, by the way, have all been from Ohio State, as well as this last one. How do you balance what the meta is and what your team prefers? Do you choose specific operators or setups that aren't meta?
I think that's a very good question. Um, So I think the biggest thing is at the end of each season, the team develops like we develop strats based off of what we expect the meta to be. Um, but more often than not, like it comes down to practice. Like let's say like we adapt fairly well to like the utility meta. We adapt like to like the adaptability meta. We try and like work as a team to like shift to the meta, but like there are always going to be like those certain things that you do over like a long period of time where it's just like it is a comfort pick. Like let's say like Callie on Cafe, like Bo, like that isn't something that we necessarily like. It's good, like Callie's good, but more often than not, she's a detriment to the team. But like we know, like Bo like feels comfortable playing her on that map, so like we give him the opportunity to. Um, and like more often than not, like we'll design stuff for the meta, and we'll design stuff like in like the middle ground of like what is going to be viable, but like what do we know like the team like will like feel comfortable doing, and like how do we like transfer their comfort over to what will be more like viable for a match. Um, but I guess it becomes about professionalism in a sense of like the team isn't just be like, well, we're not going to change because that doesn't feel comfortable. Like that's how you start losing a lot is and like over a
Mm.
long period of time is like the meta. You're like, oh, like we'll keep doing our thing because eventually the meta will favor us if we do this, and like that's not how it works. Like that's how you lose a team is by like not being able to change. Uh, and then as far as choosing like certain operators might be meta, but more often than not, like we'll have like a projection of what the meta is and what it will be, and we can kind of push that. We were the first person out of APAC or the first team out of APAC to kind of push Finka into the meta, and we got a lot of criticism for it initially, but like now she's considered meta, and like even though before like it just depends on like how other people see her is like you're doing things for a certain reason, and as long as you have that reason, it doesn't matter if it's meta or not, because it could become meta like overnight for all you know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Data. This was an awesome Q&A. Everyone who has stuck around to the end, thank you so much. Everyone who asked questions, thank you. Just we appreciate you being here. And Data, what an awesome guest you were. Any parting words for the audience?
Well, thank you to everybody who asked questions. Thank you to Madman for being my number one fan, I guess. I guess just thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. It's always interesting.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Thanks for joining. Make sure that you join the Discord. It is discord.gg/TSMU. Next week, there is no Q&A episode because it is Thanksgiving in the US. So be sure to follow the channel so that you know the next time we are live. But again, next week, there's no Q&A. Daeda, thank you so much for being here and thank you for all of your wisdom and knowledge. I know it is much appreciated by the chat and by everyone who's been viewing. Have a great night, everyone.